"Please don't go," she whispered, her voice trembling like the last leaf in a dying wind. The cowboy stopped at the threshold, rain tracing the dust on his coat. His hand hovered near the door, caught between the road and the woman behind him. Outside, thunder rolled low across the plains, carrying the memory of gunfire and sin. Inside, silence ached louder than any storm. He'd come here looking for a place to disappear. She'd already lost everything worth finding. Two souls carved by loss, standing on the edge of something neither dared to name. Her eyes were red, her palms open, as if letting go would break her in half. His chest rose once, sharp and shallow, before the words fell from him like confession. "I've been running my whole life, ma'am. I don't know how to stop." She stepped closer, the scent of rain and ashes between them. "Then learn," she said, barely a whisper. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of hoofbeats far off, a reminder that danger never stays gone for long. But for that single heartbeat, time held still, and the cowboy did not leave. The sky hung low and heavy over the Holt homestead, clouds swollen with rain that refused to fall. Clara stood beside the mound of freshly turned earth, her husband's name carved rough into a plank of cedar. The ground was hard as regret, and her fingers bled where the shovel had slipped. She didn't feel it. She hadn't felt much since the morning she found him dying on the porch, whispering her name into the dirt. A wind rose from the south, carrying the scent of burned grass and far off gunpowder. It tugged at her dress, tangled her hair, and scattered a handful of dust across the grave. She thought it fitting the prairie didn't care for endings. It only swallowed them whole. By evening, the horizon burned red. The fields her husband once tended now stood broken, fences sagging, cattle gone. The bandits had taken what they wanted and left the rest to rot. Clara picked up the rifle he'd left leaning against the porch rail. Its stock was smooth from his hands, worn down by years of faith in something that hadn't saved him. Far beyond the pasture, a figure watched from the ridge. The rider sat tall, hat brim pulled low, coat dusted gray from the road. His horse shifted beneath him, uneasy in the dying light. He'd followed the smoke 2 days back, drawn by guilt and something quieter he wouldn't yet name. When Clara turned toward the horizon, her eyes met his just for a heartbeat. He couldn't see his face, only the stillness of him, the kind of stillness men carried after losing too much. By nightfall the wind changed. The air smelled of rain and sorrow. Clara sat on the porch, the rifle across her knees, watching the last light fade from the west. The world was too big now, too quiet. She thought of the promises she'd buried along with her husband. She thought of the bandits still out there. And somewhere beneath the ache, she thought she heard hooves moving closer. Morning broke with a gray light that felt half alive. Clara moved through the yard, mending what could be mended. The chicken coop's gate hung by a single hinge. The barn roof sagged, a hole torn clean through where the wind had screamed hardest. Each task felt like an act of defiance, a way of telling the world she was still here. When she bent to gather fallen boards, the sound came again, slow, steady, deliberate. Hoofbeats. She froze, heart thudding once in her throat. The rider was coming down the hill now, leading his horse with the reins loose in one hand. His stride was careful, unthreatening. The dust of 100 miles clung to him, and yet his eyes, when he finally looked up, held the same tired grief she saw in her own reflection each morning. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, like he hadn't used it in a long time. She didn't answer. He stopped a few yards from the porch. "Didn't mean to startle you. I saw the smoke. Thought maybe someone needed help." Her grip on the rifle tightened. "You thought wrong." He nodded once, accepting it like a man who'd heard worse. "I'll be on my way then." But he didn't move. His gaze drifted past her shoulder to the grave behind the house. His jaw set, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "You lost someone," he said softly. Her voice broke for the first time in days. "Everyone loses someone out here. He tipped his hat, turned back toward his horse, but as he did, the wind shifted again, bringing the faint echo of another rider far off, or maybe two. Clara heard it too. "Bandits," he murmured. Her pulse quickened. She raised the rifle toward the sound, but the prairie was empty, just the wind brushing through brittle grass. He looked at her once more, something old and wounded in his eyes. "You ought to keep that door locked tonight." She didn't thank him. She didn't lower the rifle. But when he walked away, she found herself watching the trail long after he was gone. By dusk, the first drops of rain began to fall, cold, sharp, cleansing. Clara stood on the porch, staring into the gray distance, wondering if the stranger had found shelter. She whispered to the dark, though no one could hear her. "Go on, cowboy. Keep riding. This place'll only break you." But somewhere in her chest, she already knew he wouldn't. And as lightning split the far horizon, the prairie whispered back the kind of silence that means a story has just begun. The rain fell steady through the night, soft and cold, drumming on the porch roof like the heartbeat of a land that refused to sleep. By dawn, the world had turned to mud, the kind that clung to boots and memories alike. Clara stepped out into it anyway. Her skirt hem was soaked before she reached the barn. She worked in silence, checking the latch, clearing a path for what little she had left: one mule, a few chickens, a hard half, battered but still beating. She didn't notice the rider until his shadow crossed the yard. The same man from yesterday, the one who'd warned her to lock the door. He looked colder now, hat dripping, a thin line of blood dried on his cheek. Clara straightened, hand on the rifle resting by the door. He raised a palm, empty, steady. "Morning, ma'am. Didn't mean to spook you. Thought I might lend a hand." Her jaw tightened. "Don't need one. Fence lines down to the east," he said. "Storm must have finished what the raiders started. Cattle'll wander if you had any left." She gave a hollow laugh. "Ain't got any to wander." He shifted his weight, eyes scanning the ruin of the pasture. Still, a man hates to see a place fall apart. Clara studied him a moment. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his boots worn thin. A man used to long miles and little kindness. "You passing through?" she asked finally. "Was." His gaze drifted toward the horizon, then back to her. Got nowhere pressing to be now. Her hand tightened around the rifle stock. She wanted to send him off to keep the distance clean, but the wind cut through her shawl, and she saw the way his horse shivered beneath the rain. "You'll catch your death out there," she muttered. "Barn's dry enough." He nodded once, no smile, no thanks, just quiet acceptance. When he led his horse inside, Clara followed a few paces behind, keeping her eyes on his back like she might read the truth there. The air in the barn was thick with hay and the ghosts of better days. He loosened the saddle, spoke softly to the animal, the kind of gentleness she hadn't heard in weeks. "You got a name?" she asked. "Illy," he said, brushing rain from his hat. "Illy Boone." She didn't offer hers right away. Names felt like trust, and she wasn't sure she had any left to give. By midday, he was out by the fence line, sleeves rolled to the elbows, mending wire in silence. Clara watched from the porch, arms crossed tight. The hammering sound, metal, wood, resolve filled the long emptiness between them. When she finally brought him a tin of coffee, his hands paused mid-strike. "Didn't think you'd offer," he said. "Don't make more of it than it is," she replied, setting the tin on a post. He nodded, sipping slow, eyes on the horizon. "Storm's moving east. You'll get sun tomorrow." "Don't need it," she said. "Just quiet." Illy's gaze flicked to the small cross by the porch, the one marking her husband's grave. His voice softened. "Quiet don't mean peace, ma'am. I've learned that much." She didn't answer. The words felt too true to fight. By late afternoon, the sky cleared. The prairie stretched wide and golden, the kind of beauty that mocked grief with its indifference. Clara worked beside him without speaking, repairing what they could. Once, when their hands brushed passing a nail, she drew back like burned. He said nothing, but his glance lingered steady, patient, understanding something she couldn't yet name. When the sun dipped, Illy straightened, rolling his shoulders with a tired sigh. "Suppose I ought to move on before dark?" he said. Clara hesitated. The memory of hoofbeats from the night before still echoed in her mind. "The trail ain't safe," she said quietly. "You can stay in the loft, just tonight." He looked at her, surprise flickering quick in his eyes, then fading just as fast. "Appreciate it," he said simply. That night, rain returned in thin, steady threads. Illy sat by the barn window, cleaning his saddle, while Clara lay awake inside the house, staring at the ceiling. The roof creaked, the wind moaned through broken boards. Somewhere out there, a man who didn't owe her anything had chosen not to leave. And though she'd never admit it, the thought steadied her more than the rifle by her bed. By morning, she would find his coat hanging to dry by her door, a quiet sign of thanks, or maybe of promise. The kind that doesn't need words, the kind that lingers. The night had washed the land clean, but morning brought the truth back in pieces. The earth was heavy with moisture, each step sinking deep. Mist rolled low over the prairie, blurring the horizon into ghost-colored silence. Clara stepped out with her shawl drawn tight, the smell of wet hay thick in the air. Illy was already by the corral, sleeves rolled, hands raw from wire and wood. He moved with quiet purpose, the kind that didn't need words or witnesses. "Didn't think you'd be up this early," she said, her voice rough from the chill. He glanced over, one corner of his mouth twitching. "Old habits. The army trained it into me." She caught that word army and tucked it away like a burr under her skin. The army had passed through these parts once, months back. "Promised safety, delivered none. Fence won't hold much longer," he said, studying the posts. "You've been fighting weather and thieves both." Clara looked past him, eyes tracing the open plain. "Weather I can handle." Illy followed her gaze. Out where the mud turned to hardpan, something caught his eye, a set of fresh hoof prints leading toward the creek bed. He crouched, brushing his fingers over the edge of one. The soil was dark, pressed deep. "Not from his horse, not hers. Someone came through here," he said quietly. Clara stiffened. "Bandits." He didn't answer right away, just straightened, eyes narrowing against the wind. Could be just a drifter. But he knew better. The tracks were spaced wide, a fast ride, not a wanderer's pace, and the iron marks in the mud matched the kind favored by men who didn't pay for their horses. "Best stay close to the house today," he said. She studied him, suspicion flickering again. "You sure you ain't one of them yourself?" He didn't flinch. "If I was, I'd have taken what's left and gone." She wanted to believe him. The way his eyes held steady made it hard not to. Still, she kept the rifle close as they walked the fence together, scanning the fields for movement. By midday, the sun broke through, turning the mud to steam. Illy led the mule down to the creek for water, while Clara patched the window the wind had cracked during the storm. For a few quiet hours it felt almost like work, honest and simple. Then came the sound again, far off at first, the faint snap of a branch, the restless echo of hooves somewhere beyond the ridge. Illy froze, eyes lifting toward the north. "They're circling," he murmured. Clara stepped beside him, her breath catching. "The same ones." He nodded slowly. "They don't usually leave survivors. That makes you a loose thread." Her fingers trembled as she loaded the rifle, the rhythm practiced but shaky. "You talk like you know their kind." "I do," he said quietly. "Used to ride with men not far from their breed." The words hung between them like thunder waiting to break. She didn't ask more, not yet. But in that silence, something shifted. Fear and trust braided into one fragile strand. By late afternoon, the wind rose again, sweeping dust across the plain. Illy circled the property, studying the edges of the trail until he found what he'd been waiting for, a crushed cigarette end, still damp but fresh. Someone had been watching them from the ridge. He came back to the porch, face set, voice low. "We'll need to set light traps tonight. If they come, we'll see 'em before they reach the barn." Clara met his gaze. "You planning to stay, then?" He paused, then nodded. long enough to see you safe." That night, the lantern glow spilled in narrow bands across the yard. The air was heavy, the silence stretched tight as wire. Clara sat by the window, eyes on the horizon. Illy paced outside, rifle slung over his shoulder, his boots cutting deep tracks in the mud, a man keeping watch over something he didn't yet understand. Hours passed, the wind died, the prairie held its breath. Near midnight, Illy stopped by the fence line. In the distance, a shadow moved, then another. 2 riders, maybe 3, silent, slow. He raised his gun, breath steady. But they didn't approach. They lingered just long enough to remind him that the past never really rides away. By dawn, they were gone. Only the tracks remained deeper now, circling wider around the Holtland. Clara stepped out, pale from sleeplessness. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked. Illy looked down at the prints in the mud. "Yes, ma'am, they always do." The sun climbed, lighting the wet ground in gold and shadow. Beside those outlaw tracks, his own footprints ran alongside hers, crossing paths in the same fragile earth. Neither of them spoke of it, but both knew. The story that began with a grave was now a fight for something worth keeping. By the time the sun leaned west, the air had turned sharp with the smell of wood smoke. Illy had been mending the last section of fence all afternoon, his shirt clinging to him with the day's sweat, his hands cracked and bleeding in places. Clara watched from the porch, needle and thread idle in her lap, pretending to sew while her eyes followed the rhythm of his work. She wasn't used to another soul moving through her days. The sounds had changed, footsteps that weren't hers, tools being set down, the low hum of a man thinking while he worked. It unsettled her more than she'd admit. When dusk came, Illy stepped into the yard, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Fence'll hold for now," he said, "long enough to buy you a bit of sleep." "Sleep don't come easy," she replied. He gave a quiet nod, the kind that understood without asking why. The wind had picked up again, carrying the smell of rain and earth. He looked toward the horizon, dark clouds massing like a warning, storm brewing again. He said, "You got anything to eat?" Clara hesitated. She'd lived weeks on scraps and stubbornness. The pantry was near empty, same as her heart. "There's bread," she said finally, "if you don't mind it burnt." He smiled faintly. "Bread's bread." She stoked the fire while he cleaned up, and soon the cabin filled with the scent of smoke and rough flour. He sat at her table like a man trying to remember how. Shoulders straight, hat set aside, every motion careful, respectful. They ate in silence at first, the kind that settles deep but doesn't bite. The fire cracked, the wind sighed through the eaves, and the night crept closer around the house. When the bread caught flame at the edge, Clara cursed under her breath and went to pull it from the fire. Illy reached over, quick but gentle, steadying her hand before she burned herself. Their eyes met, startled, suspended. A heartbeat later, she pulled away. "I said it was burnt," she muttered. He chuckled, low and quiet. "I've eaten worse." It was the first time she'd heard him laugh. Not much of one, but enough to make something ache in her chest. "Where'd you come from, Illy Boone?" she asked, half to herself. He looked down at his plate. "Nowhere that mattered. Rode west when the war ended. Figured I'd find peace if I kept moving. Find it yet?" He shook his head. "Just places that feel less empty than others." The wind howled outside, and for a moment they both listened. He lifted his cup, eyes distant. "You mind me asking about the cross out back?" Clara's jaw tightened. "You already know what's buried there." "Yes, ma'am, but I don't know the man." Her voice thinned, raw at the edges. "Good man, worked hard, didn't deserve to die the way he did." Illy nodded once. "Most don't." The fire flickered, and silence followed, softer this time. Something about the way he said it made her wonder what ghosts followed him, too. When the meal was done, she gathered the plates. He tried to help, but she waved him off. "You're a guest," she said. Don't feel like one, he murmured, standing anyway. Feels like I've been here longer than a day. Maybe that's the quiet talking. He smiled again, that same tired curve of a mouth, unused to kindness. Maybe outside, thunder rumbled across the open fields. Clara looked toward the window, the sound deep and distant. They'll come back, she said. The men who did this, I know, he answered, but they'll find you ready. She turned toward him, then really looked at him. The way he stood steady, like the world hadn't already taken half of him. And in that flicker of lamplight, she felt something shift, small but certain, not safety, not yet, but the start of believing it might be possible again. When she finally blew out the lamp, the room fell into soft darkness. Outside, rain began to fall in fine silver lines, tapping the roof like a lullaby. Illy settled in the loft, boots off, hat tipped low. Clara lay awake beneath him, listening to the same storm, breathing the same air, each heartbeat a little slower than the one before. By morning, the air would clear, and the mud would dry, but the quiet between them that would stay. The morning broke pale and thin, a silver mist hanging over the fields like memory that wouldn't fade. Illy was already outside, boots sinking into dew, soaked grass, his breath clouding in the cold. The prairie stretched wide and quiet, too quiet, the kind that made a man remember. Clara stood in the doorway, shawl drawn close. She watched him move with that slow, deliberate calm that soldiers carry when they've buried more than they care to name. Fence held through the night? She asked. He turned, nodded once, for now. Her gaze followed his hands, rough, scarred, steady. You worked soldier lines, she said suddenly. I can see it. Illy's jaw tightened, the smallest pause before he answered. Used to what regiment? He hesitated, eyes drifting toward the horizon. 3rd Cavalry, out of Fort Dawson. Her breath caught. She knew the name every widow in the county did. Fort Dawson was where the soldiers had camped before the raid, where her husband had ridden for help that never came. Clara's voice went cold. The men who were supposed to protect us. Illy didn't flinch. I know what you're thinking, and you ain't wrong to think it. The silence between them stretched, taut as wire. She stepped off the porch, the rifle still leaning by the door but close enough to reach. You telling me you were one of them? I was there, he said quietly, but I didn't follow orders that day. Her eyes narrowed. You didn't stop it either. His shoulders stiffened. No, I didn't. The words fell heavy, soaked into the dirt like rain that wouldn't dry. He turned away, hands on his hips, the old shame written plain across his face. We were sent west to chase the raiders off. Command said wait for signal, said it was suicide to move without orders. I waited, and while I waited, they burned your town. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, each word reopening a wound she thought had closed. My husband rode that way, she whispered. He was trying to find those same soldiers. Illy's voice broke low. I remember him. He didn't make it far. Took a bullet before we got to him. I buried him by the road. Her hand flew to her mouth. The world seemed to tilt, the ground too soft to stand on. You saw him. He nodded, eyes wet with something more than guilt. He said your name. I didn't know who you were till I saw that cross. She turned from him, gripping the porch rail until her knuckles went white. You could have stopped it. You could have saved him. I know. His voice cracked under the weight of it. And that's why I'm still here. The wind rose then, tugging at her hair, carrying the faint cry of hawks overhead. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of the old barn door, swinging open in the distance. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, worn thin by too many nights alone. Why come back here, Illy, after all that? He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw the truth of him, not the drifter, not the stranger, but a man hollowed out by what he'd done. Because I'm tired of running from ghosts, he said. And yours ain't the only ones in that pasture. Clara swallowed hard, staring out across the field. The grass moved like a slow tide, whispering secrets only the wind could keep. I don't know if I can forgive that, she said. I don't expect you to, he replied. Just let me make it right while I can. By afternoon, they worked side by side again, not talking, just moving. The rhythm of tools, the scrape of shovel, the soft breath of effort filled the spaces words couldn't touch. Now and then, their eyes would meet, brief, uncertain, but different than before. She still saw the soldier who failed her, but she also saw the man who'd stayed when he didn't have to. As dusk fell, Clara lit a lantern in the window, a small flame against the wide dark. Illy sat by the steps sharpening his knife, the light catching in his eyes. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I'll ride out early, see if I can find where those riders are camping. She nodded, not trusting her voice. When he stood to go, she almost spoke, almost asked him to stay close, almost told him she was afraid to lose another soul to the night. But the words caught, and instead she only said, Be careful. He gave a faint smile. Always try. When he disappeared into the shadows, she looked out toward the pasture where her husband once walked and whispered into the wind, If there's forgiveness left in me, let it find him. The prairie gave no answer. Only the steady flicker of the lantern light a single, trembling promise in the dark. The dawn came cold, the sky washed in gray, and the wind running sharp through the trees. Illy saddled his horse in silence. The leather creaked, the bit clinked, and his breath rose in pale clouds. Clara stood by the gate, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, the river mist curling behind her like smoke. You don't have to do this, she said. He adjusted the strap on his rifle. Yes, ma'am, I do. Her eyes searched his face, that same quiet resolve, that same pain she'd started to understand. You think they'll be out there? I know they will. He looked toward the low hills beyond the river, where the morning fog hid the land like a secret. Tracks don't lie. They've been circling for days. She took a slow breath. If you find them, what then? He met her gaze. Then I make sure they don't find you again. The words hung heavy between them, not boast, not promise, just truth spoken plain. For a moment, she wanted to reach for his arm to stop him, but something deeper, something proud, something wounded wouldn't let her. So instead she said, The bridge is washed out near Carter's Bend. Take the shallow crossing east of the willows. He gave a small nod. You always this good at giving orders. Only when men try to get themselves killed before breakfast. That drew the faintest smile from him, a tired one, but real. He tipped his hat, eyes soft in the gray light. I'll be back before sundown. She didn't answer. She only watched him ride off through the fog, until horse and rider became a shadow swallowed by the river's breath. The crossing was rough. The river ran high from the night's rain, churning brown and cold around the horse's legs. Illy leaned forward in the saddle, steady and silent, the water biting at his boots. Halfway across, the sound came distant, faint, like thunder rolling over dry land. Hoofbeats, he slowed, eyes narrowing. Upstream, through the fog, he saw them, 3 riders, black silhouettes against the rising sun. He urged his horse forward, pushing through the current, water splashing high against his knees. On the far bank, he dismounted quick, crouched low in the tall grass and watched. The riders moved slow, scanning the land, their voices rough and careless. He caught pieces talk of the widow's place, of finishing the job. His jaw clenched. So it was true. They'd come back to clean their trail. He waited until they turned down the ridge, then followed, careful, silent, every movement measured. The trail led through the cottonwoods to a clearing by the ridge line. Their camp sat, their horses tied, fire still smoking, rifles propped against a wagon wheel. Illy counted 4 men now. One, tall and scarred, wore the same black duster he'd seen that night when the town burned. Carver, Illy whispered to himself. The name hit like grit on a wound. He loaded his revolver slow, the motion steady, practiced. Then he stepped out from the brush. Morning, Carver. The men jerked to their feet, hands going for guns. Carver's eyes narrowed, disbelief cutting through his smirk. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were dead, Boone." "Not yet," Illy said, "but you might be." Carver laughed, low and mean. "Still playing the hero, huh? You always did have a fool streak. You think that widow's worth dying for?" Illy didn't answer. He just cocked the hammer back. The sound cracked through the morning air like lightning. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the clearing erupted gunfire, tearing through smoke and echo. Illy hit the dirt, rolled behind a fallen log, returned fire. One man dropped, another stumbled back cursing. He felt a bullet graze his arm, hot and sharp. He didn't stop. When the smoke cleared, Carver was gone, vanished into the trees. The others lay still. Illy stood there, chest heaving, blood seeping down his sleeve, the smell of gunpowder thick in his lungs. The world was silent again except for the river, murmuring in the distance, steady as breath. He turned toward the sound, staring through the trees toward where the cabin would be miles away. "I ain't done yet," he muttered. Then he swung into the saddle, turned his horse south, and rode hard for home. Back at the cabin, Clara had spent the day pretending not to count the hours. Every creak of the wind made her look up. Every bird that startled near the fence made her heart stutter. When dusk fell, she lit the lantern again, the same small flame that had become her prayer. And just when she began to whisper to the empty room, the sound came hooves in the dark, steady, slow. She rushed to the door. Illy rode in through the fog, blood on his sleeve, dust on his coat, but alive. Her breath broke. "You're hurt." He slid from the saddle, winced, and shook his head. "Just a scratch." Then he looked past her toward the house. "They won't be coming back." She stepped closer, eyes shining in the lantern light. "You found them?" "I found enough." For a long moment, she just stared at him, at the man who'd carried both guilt and redemption across the river and back again. Then she said quietly, "You should come inside before the cold gets you." He hesitated, eyes on hers. "You sure you want me to?" Clara took a slow breath, then reached out, fingers brushing his hand, trembling but certain. "I'm sure," she said. And as the lantern light flickered across their faces, the river whispered on beyond the hills, carrying away the last of the ghosts that had haunted them both. The night was quiet again, too quiet. Clara thought the kind of stillness that followed storms and gunfire. The cabin smelled of pine and lamp oil. A soft rain tapped against the window panes, steady and slow. Illy sat at the table, his arm bandaged, the sleeve rolled up past his elbow. The fire cast a low glow across his face, deepening the shadows beneath his eyes. Clara poured hot water from the kettle, the steam curling between them. "You'll need to rest that arm," she said. He gave a small shrug. "Been hurt worse." Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer. "Doesn't mean it shouldn't heal right." He watched her move around the small kitchen, each motion quiet and certain, like she'd been fighting silence her whole life and learned how to make peace with it. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed a quick, electric thing neither expected. She pulled back first, clearing her throat. "You should sleep. Tomorrow's a long day." Illy glanced toward the ceiling beams where the rain drummed a gentle rhythm, roofs leaking again. He said, half smiling, "If I don't fix it tonight, we'll both be swimmin' by morning. You can't climb with that arm. Won't need 2 hands, just a good lantern and stubbornness." She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. "You're impossible. Most men worth a damn are." And before she could argue, he grabbed the lantern from the table and started toward the barn. The air outside was thick with the scent of wet earth. The barn loomed dark, the lantern's glow flickering across the boards. Inside, the hay smelled sweet and damp, and the horses shifted restlessly at his approach. He set the lantern on a post and climbed halfway up the ladder, testing his arm. Pain flared sharp, but he ignored it. Behind him, the barn door creaked open. "You shouldn't be out here," Clara said, stepping into the light. Her hair had come loose, curls framing her face in the dim glow. "You'll rip your stitches," He turned slightly, one foot on the ladder rung. "You're good at tellin' me what not to do, and you're bad at listenin'." He chuckled low, but there was warmth in it, this time something lighter than she'd heard before. "Hand me that hammer, ma'am." She didn't move right away. The sound of rain softened, replaced by the quiet hiss of lantern flame. Then she sighed and climbed up beside him, passing the hammer without a word. The roof was low, forcing them close. Each breath clouded the air between them. He leaned forward to secure a loose board, the muscles in his jaw tightening from the effort. She steadied the lantern, her other hand hovering near his back in case he slipped. "You shouldn't be doing this," she said again, quieter now. He paused, turning his head slightly toward her. "You worried about the roof, or about me?" Her eyes lifted to his, caught in the half-light. "Does it matter?" "Not to me." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, full of all the words they hadn't said since that first night by the grave. The storm outside faded to a whisper. Somewhere in the dark, a nightbird called. He drove the last nail in place and set the hammer down. "That should hold," he murmured. When he turned back, she was still watching him, not the outlaw, not the soldier, just the man. The lantern flickered between them, its flame dancing gold in her eyes. He felt his heart hitch, unsure whether to speak or move, but her nearness left him without choice. His voice came rough. "You don't owe me anything, Clara." "I know." "Then why are you still here?" She looked down, then back up, her throat tight. "Because I don't want to be alone anymore." For a moment, all sound fell away, no rain, no creak of wood, just breathe and heartbeat. Then, without meaning to, she reached out fingers, brushing his hand where it rested on the beam. The touch was small, trembling, but it stopped time. Illy didn't pull away. He only looked at her, the corners of his mouth softening. "Guess neither of us does," he said quietly. The lantern burned low, the world beyond the barn lost to shadow. When the wind shifted, it carried the smell of wild sage through the broken boards, clean, living, and new. By morning, the rain would pass and the roof would hold. But for now, under that flickering light, two hearts that had forgotten how to trust began to remember the sound of peace. The morning broke pale and thin, sunlight seeping slow through the cracks of the shutters. The storm had moved east, leaving behind a hush, so deep Clara could hear the ticking of the clock and the faint breath of wind under the door. Illy was already outside, tending to the horses, moving careful with his healing arm. She watched from the window, the rhythm of his motion steady, the kind of calm that comes only after a man's been through too much chaos. She turned away before he could look back. The kettle hissed on the stove. Everything smelled of wood smoke and coffee. It could have been peace if not for the unease creeping through her chest, quiet but sharp. The night before had changed something, not in words, not in vows, just in silence. The way his hand had lingered in hers, the way she hadn't pulled away. She'd gone to bed with her heart pounding like she was 20 again. But morning always brought truth, and truth on the frontier rarely came without a shadow. By mid-morning, she went down to the cellar to fetch flour. The light was dim, the air cool and damp. She reached for the burlap sack, and her fingers brushed metal. A revolver, oiled, loaded, and hidden beneath the grain barrel. Her breath caught. The gun wasn't one of hers. She knelt, pulling it free, and her stomach turned at what she saw, not just the weapon, but the mark burned into the grip. A small, carved snake coiled around the letters C. She'd seen that mark before, on the man who shot her husband. The air left her lungs all at once. She gripped the shelf to steady herself, the cellar spinning around her. When Illy came through the door upstairs, she didn't move. Only when his boots hit the top step did she speak, voice low, trembling with something colder than fear. "How long were you planning to tell me?" The footsteps stopped. "Tell you what?" She came up slow, the gun in her hand. "That you rode with them." Illy froze halfway down the steps. His eyes went first to the weapon, then to her face. "Clara, don't lie to me," she snapped. "I've seen this mark before. The man who killed James carried one just like it." He swallowed hard, jaw tight. "It ain't what you think. Then tell me what it is." He took one step closer, then stopped when she raised the gun. The tremor in her hand made her voice even sharper. "Don't you dare come closer, Illy Boone. Not one step." The space between them filled with dust motes and truth unspoken. Finally, he said, quiet and raw, "I did ride with them, years back, before the war ended, before I knew what kind of men they really were. I left when I saw what they'd become." "You expect me to believe that?" "No," he said. "But I'm telling you anyway." Her breath hitched. "You helped them burn homes. You helped them kill. I helped them survive, and I've been paying for it ever since." The words hit like the crack of thunder. His voice was low, but full of something deeper than excuse, shame, maybe. Regret so old it had turned into bone. Clara's hand trembled harder. The weight of the revolver felt heavier than lead. She wanted to scream, to throw it, to hate him. But beneath it all, there was that ache, the cruel truth that she cared enough for it to hurt. Illy's gaze held hers. "If you're gonna shoot me, do it clean. I ain't running." The cellar door creaked as wind pressed against the house. Dust drifted down like falling ash. Clara's heart hammered so hard she could barely see straight. Then she lowered the gun, slow, deliberate. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just exhaustion. "Get out," she whispered. Illy didn't move. "Clara, please." Her voice broke. "Before I change my mind." He hesitated only a second longer. Then he nodded once, took his hat from the peg, and walked out into the morning light without looking back. Hours passed. The house felt too quiet without the sound of boots on the porch or tools striking wood. Clara sat at the table, the gun beside her, untouched coffee gone cold. The air pressed heavy against her chest. She looked out the window, the fence he'd fixed, the barn roof holding against the wind, the saddle he'd left hanging neat on its peg. Every piece of his work still stood, solid and silent. She hated that she missed him already. By evening, the sky burned red across the ridge. The wind carried dust and memory through the fields. Somewhere out there, she knew, Illy Boone was riding again, maybe back toward the ghosts he'd never buried. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, closing her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "don't let him die trying to make up for the past." The lamp flickered once, then steadied. The night settled deep and still. And though she tried not to look, her eyes drifted to the cellar door, to the darkness beneath, where truth had finally crawled out of hiding. The night stretched long over the plains, black and breathless. The wind had gone still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Clara hadn't slept. The house creaked around her, empty and cold, every board whispering his name. She'd told him to go, and he had. But now, sitting by the darkened window with her shawl drawn close, she wondered if she'd sent away the only man who'd truly seen her since James died. The revolver lay on the table beside the lamp. She'd cleaned it, not because she planned to use it, but because it gave her hands something to do besides tremble. Outside, the horizon flickered faint, a line of fire far off to the west. For a moment she thought it was lightning. Then she heard it, distant gunfire, rolling low like thunder over the valley. Her blood ran cold. They'd come back. She stood so fast the chair fell behind her. The shotgun hung by the door. She grabbed it, heart pounding in her throat. The sound grew nearer, hooves on dirt, men shouting, the whinny of frightened horses. By the time she reached the porch, the night was alive with dust and flame. 4 riders cutting through the dark, one with a torch, one with a rifle slung low. She braced the shotgun against her shoulder. "Not again," she whispered. The first shot cracked through the air, her own splintering the fence post beside the lead rider. The men scattered, shouting, "Spread out, she's alone." Someone yelled. Then another voice, deep and sharp, "No, she ain't." A gun roared from the ridge. One outlaw dropped before his horse even bucked. Clara's breath caught. She knew that voice. Illy Boone rode down through the dark like a storm, his coat whipping behind him, muzzle flash lighting the path. "Get inside," he shouted. She didn't argue. The porch rail splintered as a bullet struck close. She ducked behind the doorway, firing once more into the night. The gunfire came in waves, quick, vicious, echoing off the hills. Illy's horse thundered into the yard, lathered and wild. He jumped down, firing as he ran for the porch. They circled around the ridge. He yelled, slamming the door shut behind him. "We've got maybe a minute." Clara's eyes flashed with anger and fear. "You came back." He checked the revolver, that same snake-handled gun, and met her gaze. "Told you I wasn't running." The windows shattered as a round tore through the glass. Illy pushed her down behind the table, returned fire through the frame. "Stay low," he said. "I'm not hiding," she snapped. "This is my home." He gave a half-smile, grim and proud. "Then let's defend it." For a few heartbeats, the world was nothing but thunder and smoke. Wood splinters rained down, the lamp overturned, flames licking the floorboards before Clara smothered them with her shawl. When the shooting stopped, the air was thick with gunpowder and silence. Illy reloaded, breathing hard. 2 left. He muttered, "Maybe 3. "Then finish it," Clara said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his chest broke open. "You shouldn't have to see this." "I've seen worse," she whispered. "I lost everything once, not again." He nodded once, then kicked the door open and stepped into the cold dawn. The sky was turning gray, streaked with pale light. The bandits were retreating toward the tree line, but one turned, rifle raised. The shot came fast, too fast. Illy fired back, but the bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He staggered, dropped to one knee. "Illy." Clara ran to him, dragging him behind the broken fence. She pressed her hand to the wound, her palm slick with blood. "Stay with me," she whispered. He coughed, tried to lift his revolver, but she pushed it down. "No more," she said. "Please." The last rider broke from the tree's carver, the man with the scar. He aimed straight for them, grinning. "Should have stayed gone, Boone." Before he could fire, Clara stood. The shotgun kicked hard against her shoulder, the echo rolling through the valley. Carver fell without another sound. For a long moment, there was only the wind. Then the sun began to rise, slow and red, spilling light across the ruined yard. Clara sank beside Illy, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "You fool," she whispered. "You came back." He smiled faintly, breath shallow. "Couldn't let you fight alone. Don't you dare die on me." He looked up at her eyes, dark, voice weak but steady. "Not if you ask me to stay." Her throat tightened. "Please don't go," she said, the words trembling out of her like a prayer. Illy's hand found hers, rough and warm despite the blood. "Then I won't," he whispered. And there, in the quiet before the sun broke fully over the land, Clara Holt leaned down and kissed the man who'd come back for her, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but love. The wind carried the smoke away. The light touched the graves on the hill, the broken fence, the cabin that still stood. The fight was over, but the dawn was just beginning. The dawn came hard and red, the kind that bled across the horizon like an old wound reopened. Smoke drifted thin above the prairie, curling from the blackened fence posts. The world had gone quiet again, but it wasn't peace, it was the silence that follows pain. Clara stood in the yard, her hands stained with Illy's blood. He lay inside, pale but breathing, the bandage tight across his shoulder. She'd done what she could. Now she waited, listening to the ticking clock, every second slower than the last. He stirred once, half conscious, whispering her name through the fever. She smoothed his hair back, her voice trembling. "Rest, Illy. You're safe now." But even as she said it, the sound reached her faint at first, like thunder rolling over far hills. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. Her heart stopped. She went to the window. Dust rose from the south trail, a long, snaking cloud moving fast. The Devil's Riders, the rest of Carver's gang. She turned back toward the bed. Illy's eyes were open now, glazed with pain but aware. "They're coming, aren't they?" She nodded, jaw set. "You can't fight. You need to stay down." He tried to push himself up anyway. "They'll burn this place to the ground. Not if I stop them first." He caught her wrist. "Clara?" She met his eyes, steady and fierce. "You came back to protect me. Now it's my turn." He wanted to argue, but her voice left no room for it. So he let go, his hand falling weakly against the blanket. "There's dynamite in the barn," he rasped. "Old mining stock I brought from town. Fuse lines short." She hesitated, the weight of his meaning sinking in. "You're tellin' me to blow the barn." "I'm tellin' you to end this," he said. "They'll come through that way first. Draw them in, then light it. You'll have seconds." Her throat tightened, but she nodded once. "You hold on till I get back." He managed a faint smile. "Ain't plannin' to go anywhere?" By the time she reached the barn, the hoofbeats were closer. The earth itself seemed to shake beneath them. She worked fast, hands shaking as she laid the fuse, setting the barrels behind the hay bales near the door. The sky had gone gray, clouds piling thick as if the land itself sensed what was coming. From the hilltop, the riders appeared, a swarm of black coats and glinting steel. Carver's second Inca, manned road front, rifle raised. His shout carried clear through the wind. "Burn it! Burn everything!" Clara struck the match, her breath held tight. The fuse hissed to life, sparks crawling slow toward the powder. Then she stepped outside, shotgun in hand, standing square in the doorway like a sentinel carved from grief and dust. "Come and take it," she called, voice steady. The first man charged. She fired once, clean. He fell, another came, then two more. Gunfire tore through the yard, echoing against the hills. The fuse burned closer. She backed toward the post, her chest heaving. The gang was too many. She could see it now, but she didn't move. She wasn't giving up her land, not again. Then from behind the cabin came a sound she hadn't expected, a rifle shot, sharp and true. The lead rider dropped from his horse. Another fell before he could turn. Illy Boone was on his feet. He moved slow, his wound bleeding through the bandage, but his aim was steady. Each shot bought her another breath. "Light it, Clara!" he shouted. She turned, the fuse almost gone. For one suspended moment she saw the faces of the men still riding down on them, rage, greed, fear. And behind her, the barn glowed faintly red as the fire reached the powder line. She ran for the porch, dove behind the stone trough, and covered her head. The explosion cracked the sky. Flame roared upward, the barn splintering into fire and smoke. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Chaos swallowed everything. The shockwave threw dust and heat across the yard, rattling the cabin walls. When the sound faded, nothing moved. The field lay littered with wreckage, the devil's riders scattered or dead, their revenge burned to ash. Clara rose slow, the world ringing in her ears. The barn was gone, only smoke and cinders where it had stood. Through the haze, she saw Illy on one knee, his rifle dropped, his body swaying. She ran to him, kneeling beside him as the last flames died down. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaking through the soot. "You should have stayed inside." He looked at her, eyes glassy but alive. "Wouldn't have missed the view," he murmured. She pressed her forehead to his, her voice breaking. "It's over." He nodded faintly. "Maybe, but it cost us near everything." Clara looked around the ruin, the smoke, the bodies still, then back to him. "Not everything," she said. "You're still here." And for the first time since the bandits came, the wind shifted. It blew clean across the prairie, carrying away the smell of gunpowder, leaving behind only earth, ash, and the faint promise of mercy. The smoke hung low over the homestead, curling slow around the fence posts and blackened earth. The sun had climbed higher, but it offered no warmth, just light on ruin. Clara's hands trembled as she pressed a fresh bandage against Illy's wound. He was pale, lips dry, his shirt soaked crimson again. She tore another strip from her apron, whispering, "Stay with me. You hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, the faintest trace of a grin on his face. "You give orders like a general. Then you better follow 'em," she said, voice breaking halfway through. "I've buried one man on this land. I ain't burying another." He winced as she tied the cloth tight. "You always this stubborn." She met his gaze, eyes red and raw. "Only when I care." He tried to laugh, but it turned to a cough. Blood flecked his lips. She caught him before he fell forward, guiding him gently to the chair by the table. The cabin was quiet except for the clock ticking and the wind pushing against the shutters. On the wall behind Illy, a streak of blood marked where he'd leaned before she caught him. It shone dark and wet under the morning light, blood on the doorframe. She stared at it for a long time. "This place has seen enough death," she whispered. Illy lifted his head, weak but steady. "It's seen fight. In two. Don't be ashamed of that." Clara swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the stain. "I'm not ashamed," she said softly, "just tired." For a long moment neither spoke. The wind died down. The land beyond the window looked peaceful again, though the silence felt like something earned, fragile, fleeting. Then came the sound that made her heart stop. A horse, not a gallop, not a charge. Just slow, deliberate steps crunching over gravel. She grabbed the shotgun from beside the door, her pulse hammering. "Stay here," she told him. Illy tried to rise, failed, and cursed under his breath. "Clara," but she was already on the porch, eyes scanning the road. A lone rider approached, dust clinging to his coat. Not one of Carver's men. This one wore a deputy's star half, tarnished by sun and dirt. His face was lined, tired, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He reined in near the gate, nodding once. "Ma'am." Clara didn't lower the gun. "You law. Used to be," he said. "Name's Marshal Kane. Heard tell of shootin' out this way. Saw the smoke." His gaze shifted to the burn. "Doubt barn. Looks like you had a war." "Wasn't by choice," she said. He swung down from his horse, studying the yard. The bodies, the tracks, the ruins, that Carver's gang. She nodded. He spit into the dirt. "Good riddance." His eyes landed on the cabin door then. The streak of blood still wet. "Who's hurt, my friend?" she said, her voice low. "He took a bullet protectin' me." Kane's brow furrowed. "Name, Illy Boone." The marshal went still. His hand drifted toward the butt of his pistol. Not in threat, but instinct. "Boone," he said slowly. "That name's known from here to Abilene. I don't care what you've heard," Clara said, stepping between him and the door. "He's not the man he was." Kane studied her a moment longer, then nodded once. "I reckon he's earned a chance to prove it." She lowered the shotgun slightly, but her grip didn't ease. "You came here to arrest him." He sighed. "I came to see if anyone lived. But if it's Boone, well, some folks'll come askin'. The kind of men who don't wait for law or proof." Her chest tightened. "You mean bounty hunters?" He met her eyes. "That, or worse. Word'll spread fast. Best thing you can do is get him outta here before it does." Her jaw set. "He can't ride." "Then you'd best pray he heals quick," Kane said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "He may have done wrong before, ma'am, but I've seen plenty of men who did worse and never tried to make it right." She nodded once. "He's done enough right for me." Kane gave a small, sad smile. "Then I'll buy you time." He turned, mounted his horse, and looked back toward her porch. "Sun'll be down in 6 hours. By then, I'll be talkin' the rider's story to every lawman from here to Dry Creek. You take him and go before then." Clara's voice trembled. "You do that for us, for him," Kane said. "He saved my brother once, long ago. Never thought I'd get the chance to pay it back." He tipped his hat. "Good luck, Mrs. Holt." As his horse carried him down the trail, Clara stood on the porch, staring after him. The prairie stretched endless before her, open, dangerous, free. She turned back toward the cabin. Illy was watching her through the window, pale but alive, eyes heavy with everything left unsaid. She stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. The blood on the frame caught her eye again, dark, drying now, a mark of what they'd endured. She touched it gently with her fingertips, whispering, "We'll leave before sunset." Illy's voice came low behind her. "Where will we go?" She looked out toward the wide horizon. "Anywhere they can't find us." He smiled faintly, his voice barely above a breath. "Long as I'm beside you, that's anywhere." And for the first time in days, Clara Holt let herself believe in tomorrow. The wind had quieted by morning, carrying only the faint scent of ash and rain. The prairie, once scarred by fire and gunpowder, seemed to breathe again, slow, wounded, alive. Clara stepped outside, her boots sinking into soft, blackened soil. The smoke that had covered the horizon the night before now drifted thin, almost gentle. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The silence itself felt sacred. Behind her, Illy stirred from the cot. Each movement drew a wince, but he pushed himself upright, refusing to let pain be his keeper. His wound was wrapped clean, his face pale, his eyes brighter than they'd been in days. She turned when she heard him. "You shouldn't be standin' yet." He smiled faintly. "If I'm breathin', I can stand." Clara stepped toward him, setting a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You keep actin' like that, and I'll have to knock you down myself." He laughed, a quiet, rough sound that made her heart twist. "Reckon you could." They shared a long look. For the first time since the shooting, the space between them wasn't filled with fear, only something soft, fragile, and new. By the time the sun had cleared the far ridge, Clara was already at the edge of the yard, digging again. 2 graves this time, no names carved, no markers beyond a single stone each. The earth was heavy, but her hands didn't shake. When Illy joined her, limping, she didn't protest. He carried a small wooden cross one he'd whittled from the splintered barn rail during the night. He planted it at the head of the first mound, his hand lingering there a moment. "No man deserves to be remembered by the worst thing he did," he said. Clara looked at him, her breath catching. "That true for them or for you?" Illy's eyes held hers, unflinching. "Maybe both." They worked in silence after that. When it was done, she brushed dirt from her skirt and stared out toward the endless stretch of prairie. The land was quiet again, too quiet. Marshal Kane was right, she said at last. "Word'll travel fast," Illy nodded. "I'll be gone before dark." She turned to him sharply. "Gone?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "You heard him, Clara. Men'll come lookin'. I can't drag you into that." Her hands balled at her sides. "You think I ain't already in it? This is my land, my fight. You don't get to decide for me." He looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. "I can't stay here, not after what I've brought you." She stepped closer, voice trembling but firm. "You brought me back to life." The words hit him harder than any bullet could. He searched her face, saw the grief, the exhaustion, the stubborn fire that refused to die. And for a moment he almost believed he could stay. But then the wind shifted. A far-off echo hoofbeats, faint but steady, rolled across the open plain. Illy froze. "They're comin'." Clara's breath caught. "Now." He moved toward the porch, grabbing the saddlebag, wincing with every step. "I'll lead 'em off. You'll bleed out before you reach the ridge," she said, grabbing his arm. "Better me than you," he murmured. She shook her head, eyes fierce. "No more runnin', Illy. Not from them, not from me." He stopped. The wind lifted a curl of her hair across her face. He brushed it back without thinking. For one breathless heartbeat, they simply stood there, a widow and a gunman, bound by all they'd lost and all they hadn't dared to claim. "Then we fight together," he said. Clara's chin lifted, like before. They set to work, quick and quiet. She loaded shells by the window. He checked the rifle with shaking hands. Every motion felt like muscle memory, now survival carved into the rhythm of their days. But no riders came, not that hour, not the next. The wind carried nothing but the sound of distant birds and the low creak of the barn's broken beam. By mid-afternoon, Illy lowered his gun. "False alarm," he whispered. Clara didn't answer. She stared out the window, watching the land shimmer in heat. Then her gaze softened. Maybe it's over. He exhaled, long and weary. Maybe. That evening, as the sun fell behind the cottonwoods, they sat on the porch. A small fire crackled between them, throwing soft light on tired faces. The air smelled of sage and rain, soaked dust. Illy leaned back, his arm pressed against the rail. You ever think the land remembers? Clara looked at him, puzzled. Remembers what? Everything, he said quietly. Every bullet, every prayer, every promise buried in its dirt. She smiled faintly. Then I hope it remembers the good, too. He met her eyes like you. The fire popped. For the first time in a long while, she didn't look away. When the flames burned low, she rose to fetch a blanket. He caught her wrist gently. Clara. She paused. He swallowed hard, voice hoarse. If I don't make it through the night, don't. She whispered. Don't talk like that. But he did. If I don't. I need you to know you gave me something I never thought I'd get again. Her eyes shone in the firelight. Peace. He smiled weakly. Home. She covered his hand with hers, squeezing tight. Then you'll live, because I ain't lossin' another home. The wind shifted again, softer now, carrying the scent of rain and rebirth. And as the first drops began to fall, washing away the ash from the porch steps, Clara Holt closed her eyes and whispered the only prayer she had left. Let the land forget the blood, but not the love that came after. The rain lingered through the night, a slow, steady rhythm on the cabin roof. By dawn, the world was clean again, washed of blood, smoke, and noise. Only the quiet remained, soft as a hymn. Clara sat at the small table, the lamp still burning low beside her. Illy slept in the cot, one arm resting against his bandaged side, his breath shallow but steady. She watched him for a long time, tracing the rise and fall of his chest, the curve of his jaw, the scars she'd come to know by heart. Beside her lay a folded piece of paper, creased, worn, the ink faint. She had found it tucked inside Illy's saddlebag while cleaning his gear the day before. At first she thought it a scrap, a note forgotten. But when she unfolded it, the writing stopped her cold. It was her name at the top, Mrs. Clara Holt. The rest was written in a hand she recognized now, strong, sure, shaped by a life of hard living and harder regret. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the page and began to read. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you myself. I don't reckon I deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know who I was before you found me. My name ain't one the law speaks kindly of. I rode with Carver once. We burned and took and left behind more sorrow than I can count. When I saw his men come for your place, I knew the faces, knew the kind of pain they'd bring. I tried to stop it, and I failed. That's the truth. I came back after to set it right, or die tryin'. But then I saw you buryin' your man with your own hands, and something broke in me. You didn't cry for yourself, only for him, and that. It shamed me. Every day since, you've shown me what mercy looks like, what a soul still worth savin' feels like. You didn't need me, Clara, but you kept me alive anyway. If I fall before I can say it plain, I love you, not in the way a broken man loves, but in the way a man prays, quiet, hopeless, true. The words blurred as her eyes filled. She pressed a hand over her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. He had written it with the intent to leave, she realized, to go quietly before she ever knew. She folded the letter once more, her hands shaking, and looked over at him. He stirred in his sleep, muttering something low. Her name, maybe, or a prayer. The sound pierced her deeper than any confession could. Clara rose slowly, crossing to the cot. She sat on the edge, brushed damp hair from his brow, and whispered, "You fool of a man, thinking you had to leave for me to forgive you." Her tears fell onto his cheek, tracing the lines of his face. He didn't wake, only turned slightly toward her touch, as if the warmth reached him even in dreams. By morning, the rain had passed, and a pale light broke through the clouds. Clara stepped outside, the letter still folded in her palm. The air smelled of wet sage and soil, renewal. She walked to the fence line where wildflowers had begun to bloom again, small and stubborn between the ashes. The letter's edges fluttered in the breeze, as if unsure whether to stay or fly. She held it up to the light, reading one line again and again. I love you, quiet, hopeless, true. Her throat tightened. She pressed the paper against her heart, then tucked it carefully into her apron pocket. Back inside, Illy was awake. The color had returned to his cheeks, faint but real. He smiled when he saw her. Didn't think you'd still be here. She returned the smile, though her eyes glistened. I read your letter. The blood drained from his face. Clara, she lifted a hand. Don't you dare apologize. He stopped, watching her as she sat beside him again. You wrote about shame, she said softly, about not deservin' forgiveness. But forgiveness ain't earned, Illy. It's given. He swallowed hard. You'd give it to a man like me, she nodded, slow and sure. Already did. The silence that followed was heavy with truth. He reached for her hand, hesitated. Then she took his first. Then I reckon I've got one last thing to set right. He whispered. What's that? He looked toward the door, the open land beyond it. Livin', for once. Clara smiled, tears breaking free again. Then you'd best start today. He grinned, weak but steady. Yes, ma'am. That night, she placed the letter inside a small wooden box, along with her late husband's wedding ring and a lock of hair. The past sealed together, not forgotten, but forgiven. And when she blew out the lamp, the room was filled with the sound of Illy's steady breathing and the whisper of the prairie wind slipping through the cracks. For the first time, it didn't sound like sorrow. It sounded like peace. The morning came quiet, gold light spilling through the thin curtains. The smell of coffee lingered over the stove, though neither of them had touched it. Illy sat on the edge of the cot, boots laced, hat in his lap, shoulders bowed like a man waiting on judgment. Clara stood in the doorway, arms folded, the pale dawn behind her making her hair glow like firelight. She didn't speak for a long while. She didn't have to. The silence between them said more than words could carry. Illy turned the hat in his hands, slow and deliberate. The horse is saddled, he said. His voice was rough, hoarse from the night's long thinking. I figured, she said softly. He rose, wincing from the pull of the half-healed wound, and looked around the cabin. Every nail, every scar on the wood held a story now. You'll be safe, he murmured. Marshal Kane'll see to that. She let out a dry laugh, barely more than breath. Safe, out here, there ain't no such thing. Illy nodded, jaw set tight. Then you'll make it yourself. You're stronger than this place, Clara, stronger than me. He stepped toward the door, but she moved to block him. You think ridden off fixes anything. It keeps you from payin' for my mistakes, he said. That's enough. Her voice rose, trembling. You think I ain't already paid. You think bury, in my husband, rebuild. In this land, Lawson sleep every night over ghosts I didn't make. That wasn't enough. Illy stopped, eyes closing. Don't do this. I will, she said, her voice breaking now, because I'm done lettin' the men I love ride away thinkin' that's what saves me. He turned then, meeting her eyes, his own glistening. If I stay, they'll come back. You'll never have peace. She took a single step closer. Peace don't mean a damn thing if I gotta leave it alone. The air went still. Only the low creak of the windmill outside filled the pause between them. Illy swallowed hard, his throat working against the words he didn't want to say. Clara, she shook her head, tears cutting trails down her dust-streaked cheeks. Please don't go. The sound of it, quiet, pleading, stopped him cold. He looked at her then, really looked, the weight of everything they'd survived pressing between them. The fight, the graves, the forgiveness, and in her eyes he saw something he'd never known how to believe in before. Home, his hand loosened on the hat. It dropped to the floor. I don't know how to stay, he whispered. You don't have to know, she said, stepping closer until her voice trembled against his chest. You just have to choose to. For a long, suspended breath, neither moved. Then his arms came up, slow, uncertain, and wrapped around her. Her forehead pressed against his shirt, and he could feel her heart beating hard against his ribs. He let out a shuddered breath. I was halfway gone already. Then come back, she said, all the way this time. Outside, the prairie wind shifted. The smell of dust gave way to something cleaner, the scent of rain, soaked sage of spring returning. Illy drew back just enough to see her face. You sure about this? Clara nodded. You've been runnin' long enough. Let it end here, with me. He cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away the last of her tears. You got a way of makin' a man believe things he never dared to. She smiled faintly. Then believe this, you don't have to earn peace, Illy. You just have to stop leavin' it behind. The sun rose higher, spilling gold across the cabin floor. The rifle leaned unused by the wall. The door stood open, the horizon wide and waiting. But for once, he didn't step toward it. Instead, Illy Boone took her hand and for the first time didn't run. By afternoon, the wind had settled. The sky stretched wide and blue, soft clouds drifting lazy over the hills. The kind of day that made the land look forgiven. Illy stood by the porch rail, cleaning his revolver out of habit more than need. The weapon had been part of him so long, it felt strange even to hold it without the old tension behind it. The scars on his hand caught the light, small reminders of the years he'd lived by the barrel and the trigger. Clara stepped out, wiping her palms on her apron. You don't have to keep that close anymore, she said gently. He didn't look up. Old habits die slow. Some habits deserve to. Her tone was soft, but there was steel in it. She walked down the steps, stopping beside him. The wind stirred her hair. He could smell the faint sweetness of lilac soap. He turned the revolver once more, then stopped, looking down at it. The dark iron, the worn grip. The weight of it had once felt like power. Now it just felt heavy. Clara spoke again, quiet. How many years did that thing decide who you were? He met her eyes, voice low. All of them, I guess. And what are you without it? The question landed like a stone dropped in still water. He stared at her, then at the gun. For a moment, the silence stretched thin between them, until he stepped forward. He knelt in the dust and set the revolver down. The sound of metal hitting earth was soft but final, like a chapter closing. He stared at it for a long time before he spoke. Guess we'll find out. Clara knelt beside him. Her hand brushed his arm, light as breath. That's the bravest thing I ever saw a man do. He gave a small, tired smile. You ever think bravery's just a man's way of saying he's done running? She laughed softly, the sound catching on a tear. Maybe it is. The sun slid lower, gilding the dry grass around them. Illy picked up a handful of dust and let it fall through his fingers, watching it drift across the ground until it covered the revolver. There, he murmured, let the earth keep it. Clara's gaze followed the motion, her throat tightening. You sure? Yeah, he said. I been carrying ghosts long enough. They stood together in the settling light. Behind them, the land was scarred but alive. Rows of soil waiting for seed, the barn half rebuilt, the fences standing again. Illy looked toward the horizon. Hard to believe we made it through. Clara's voice softened. We didn't make it through, Illy. We started over. He nodded, her words sinking deep. Never thought I'd get a second chance. Maybe you didn't, she said with a faint smile. Maybe you just took it. He turned to her then, the wind stirring the edges of her dress. And you still see me for what I was. I see you for what you chose to be. He reached for her hand, rough meeting gentle, the way the frontier always did. And for a long while they just stood there, the prairie stretching wide and endless before them. When the last light hit the hills, she whispered, Come inside. Supper's gettin' cold. He hesitated, glancing once more at the revolver buried shallow under the dust. Then he nodded. "Yeah, guess I'm done eatin' alone." They walked back toward the cabin together, shadows long behind them, the sound of their footsteps the only proof they were still here, still trying, still alive. Behind them, the wind rose again, scattering the loose dust over the place where the gun had fallen. By the time the stars came out, it was gone from sight, swallowed by the same land that had once witnessed all their pain. And for the first time, Illy Boone slept that night without reaching for the weapon by his bed. Spring came slow that year, the kind of slow that makes you wonder if the earth forgot how to wake. But one morning, Clara stepped out to the porch and found Green pushing through the brown tiny shoots, stubborn and alive, fighting their way into the light. She smiled, kneeling to touch the damp soil. "Told you they'd take root," she whispered. Illy came up behind her, rolling his sleeves, the sun catching the edge of a scar that no longer seemed to matter. "Guess you were right," he said. His voice carried that quiet ease she hadn't heard before, the sound of a man who finally stopped running. They worked the field together that day, side by side. The rhythm of shovels, the scent of wet dirt, the steady heartbeat of wind across the prairie. It was all part of the same slow forgiveness. At midday, they rested by the fence line. Clara poured him water from the canteen. "You still think about it?" she asked. He wiped his brow. "What, the gun, the past, all of it?" He nodded. "Some nights, but it don't own me no more. I reckon that's the difference." Clara looked out across the field, the small green sprigs swaying like promises in the wind. "That's enough, Illy. That's all any of us get. One good chance to start again." He smiled faintly. "You ever think maybe this was what I was runnin' toward all along?" She met his gaze, her expression soft. "No, Illy, I think this is what was waitin' when you stopped." For a while, they just sat there, watching the land breathe again. The barn stood steady, the sky wide and unbroken, and the air carried the faint hum of life returning. Then Illy leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I keep thinkin' how many men died never know, in peace like this." Clara's voice was quiet, then live enough for them too. He looked at her, eyes warm beneath the brim of his hat. "You sure got a way of sayin' things that stick. I learned from the best," she said with a grin. The sun slid higher, painting the fields gold. Illy rose, brushing dust from his jeans, and reached down to help her up. Their hands lingered a moment longer than they needed to. When she stood, she looked around at what they'd built. The repaired fence, the mended roof, the patch of green where the soil once looked dead. "You think it'll hold?" she asked. Illy nodded. "Yeah, long as we do." They turned back toward the house, shoulders brushing as they walked. The sound of distant thunder rolled low in the hills, but neither of them looked up. Because this time it didn't sound like trouble. It sounded like rain, the kind that brings things back to life. As they reached the porch, Clara paused, glancing at him with that half-smile that had started to mean everything. "Come on," she said. "Let's see if the world's finally done tackin' from us." Illy took one last look at the horizon, at the sky that had once felt too wide to ever belong to him. Then he turned to her. "Not tackin' anymore," he said quietly. "Not while I've got you." And together they stepped inside, leaving the door open to the wind and the light, the sound of their laughter rising through the empty fields. Proof that even the hardest land can bloom again, if you plant something worth keeping. The cottonwoods had always been their silent witnesses to grief, wind, and time. Their leaves shimmered in the morning light now, soft as whispered prayers. Beneath them, the grass had grown tall again, hiding the old scars of fire and footsteps. Clara stood in a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, the hem brushing the tops of her boots. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. Illy stood beside her in a clean shirt, the same hat he'd worn the day they met, brim freshly shaped, as if to mock the start of something new. The preacher's voice was steady, roughened by the years. "Do you, Illy Boone, take this woman to be your lawful wife?" to honor her, protect her, and stand by her all your days. Illy's voice came low but clear. I do. And do you, Clara Holt, take this man to be your husband, to love him, trust him, and share your life upon this land? Clara met Illy's eyes. The world seemed to still around them. I do, she said, her voice breaking just enough to show the truth in it. The preacher smiled faintly. Then, by the grace of the Almighty, I pronounce you man and wife. A hush fell. For a long breath, no one moved. Then Illy reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from Clara's face, his hand lingering against her cheek. The air between them carried every word they didn't say. He kissed her softly. Nothing grand, nothing rushed, just a promise, sealed in sunlight and silence. The cottonwoods rustled above them like applause from heaven itself. When they turned to face the handful of neighbors gathered near the fence line, the applause came real, quiet, genuine, full of something old and sacred. Even old Sheriff Danner, leaning on his cane, tipped his hat and said, "'Bout time." Clara laughed through her tears. "Guess I took the long way round to Happy," she said. Illy smiled. "You got there just fine." By noon, the small crowd had gone. A few pies, a bottle of whiskey, and laughter fading into the afternoon wind were all that remained. But for Illy and Clara, the day felt endless. They walked the field hand in hand, past the corral and down toward the cottonwoods again. The same spot where she'd once buried a man. The same spot where Illy had first watched her from the ridge, unsure if he deserved to step closer. Now they stood together, and the ground didn't feel haunted anymore. Clara placed a wildflower at the base of the old wooden cross, faded and splintered by years of sun. "He'd want to see it this way," she murmured. Illy nodded. "I reckon he would." The wind stirred through the branches, scattering bits of white cotton through the air. It looked like snow falling in spring, pure, fleeting, beautiful. Clara leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Feels strange," she said softly, "like we're standing in the same place, but everything's changed." "It has," Illy said, "but maybe that's what livin' is, standin' where it hurt once and lettin' it heal." She smiled, eyes closed. "You keep talking like that, you'll have me believe in you were born a preacher." He chuckled. "Preacher'd never make it out here. Takes too much dirt under your nails." By evening, the sky turned gold and violet, the first stars winking through the blue. They sat beneath the trees, his arm around her shoulders, her hand tracing the grain of his wedding band. The land stretched out before them, quiet, endless, alive again. And though neither said it aloud, both knew the truth. They had not just survived the frontier. They had remade it. The past was still out there somewhere, riding its own lonely trail. But here, under the cottonwoods, they had found what every soul chases and few ever catch: peace that doesn't fade with the light. As the wind moved through the branches one last time, Clara looked up, eyes glistening in the dusk. "Illy," she whispered, "yeah, don't ever let me forget what it took to get here." He tightened his arm around her. "I couldn't even if I tried." And when night finally settled, they sat in silence, the world small and sacred again, two hearts, one promise, beneath the cottonwoods that had seen everything and would keep on standing long after they were gone. Morning came slow and golden, spilling over the hills like a blessing. The prairie breathed easy again, soft wind through tall grass, the hush of peace where once there'd been screams and gunfire. The land had scars, same as the people who called it home. But scars weren't shame anymore. They were proof of survival. Illy saddled the horses while the sun climbed higher, his movements easy, unhurried. He'd done it 1,000 times before, but today felt different. No fight ahead, no running to or from anything, just the quiet rhythm of a man who'd finally found where he belonged. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her hair loose, her smile faint and full. The air smelled of coffee and damp earth. "You're up early," she said. He turned, one hand resting on the saddle horn. "Couldn't sleep. Thought we'd ride the fence line, see how the lands hold." She nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. "I'll come with you." They rode side by side, the horses' hooves stirring little clouds of dust that shimmered in the morning light. Every fence post, every gate, every patch of green they passed was a piece of their story, a reminder of how far they'd come from the day they met beneath a storm, dark sky. For a while neither spoke. The world didn't need words. When they reached the far ridge, they stopped. From there, the horizon stretched wide and endless, a quiet promise in every direction. Clara leaned forward in the saddle, her gaze soft and steady. "It's strange," she said. "For so long, I thought this land would be the death of me. But now—" Illy looked at her, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. "Now it's your home." She smiled. "Our home." He nodded, the words settling deep in his chest. Home, something he hadn't had since he was a boy, something he never thought he'd earn. The wind changed, gentle, warm, carrying the scent of sage and new grass. Illy watched it move through the valley and thought about all the men who never made it here, who'd fallen to greed, to guilt, to the unforgiving pull of the frontier. He'd come close himself. But somehow, Grace had found him in the shape of a widow with fire in her eyes and forgiveness in her hands. Clara turned to him, her voice barely above the wind. "You ever wonder what comes next?" Illy took a slow breath. "No need to wonder. We keep livin', fix what breaks, plant what grows, let the rest be." She laughed softly. "You make it sound simple. Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe it always was. We just had to walk through the dust to see it." The sun climbed higher, the light painting their faces gold. Birds scattered from the brush, their wings catching the air like scattered sparks. After a while, Clara spoke again. "You think the world remembers folks like us?" Illy smiled, eyes on the horizon. "Don't reckon it has to. The land remembers. Every fence post, every seed, every quiet morning like this. It keeps what's worth keepin'." Clara nodded. "Then that's enough." They sat their horses in silence, side by side, two figures small against the vastness of the west. The land that had taken so much had finally given something back. Peace, love, and the chance to start again. Illy reached for her hand. She took it, their fingers locking gently. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, its echo fading into the wind. He glanced over at her. "You ready to head back?" She smiled. "Not yet." So they stayed, watching the horizon stretch quiet and eternal, the sun turning the fields to gold, the world wide open before them. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to fear. No ghosts, no gunfire, no goodbye waiting at dawn. Only the sound of wind, the heartbeat of the earth, and the kind of silence that means you've finally come home. Fade to quiet. The story ends, but the land keeps breathing,